I'm so excited you are here for the 5-step path to double-digit growth in math. I am Chrissy Allison. I'll be your host today, and let's jump in. Okay, so here's what we'll be covering today. The behind the scenes of our double-digit growth journey at the school that I was working at when I was a math coach. Lessons I've learned since those days, some common roadblocks that can slow you down, teaching math versus coaching math, and then how to stay on the path and get the support that you need. So in a nutshell, I am going to show you how you can focus your math improvement efforts to increase equitable math teaching and learning at your school or district. That is the theme of this, is focusing in and stripping away some of the complexity and the overwhelm that I know a lot of us feel when we're working in schools, because there's just so much that we can be doing. You lead or coach math teachers or other coaches if you're in a district role or something like that. One of the biggest things that I discovered was that there is a difference between teaching and leading other teachers. And I think so often in education, you find a really great math teacher and that teacher gets promoted or applies to be a coach. And we just move into that role and we think, well, I'll just share what I did with the other teachers and I'll lead them that way. And what I've come to find out is that there's a lot more to coaching and leading a team than having just been a good teacher, right? It's like one of these, what got you here won't get you there kind of situations, what got you to really great results in your own classroom aren't the only things that you need in order to move a whole school or a whole district. I did find that to be one of the most challenging things when I was a math coach, was this idea of like, now I'm a manager, now I'm leading a team, and there's all these other leadership skills that like I haven't had to use before. All right, so you are probably responsible, not solely responsible, but you feel the responsibility for improving math teaching and learning in your school or district. And if those numbers aren't moving and you're not seeing progress, you're like, that's on me to like problem solve around this and figure out what we need to put in place and do differently. Okay, you feel like you have too many balls in the air, too many initiatives, priorities, people to support, fires to put out, all the things, right? We already heard that. How do I get it all done in a day? Well, you don't, you prioritize, right? So we'll get there. But I think that, again, that's one of the tough things here. We've got so many people with needs. We got teachers, we got admin, district folks, your own, maybe you teach yourself. It just feels like you're running from thing to thing to thing to thing. And you know that students at your school or district, they can do better in math, but maybe you're not quite sure how to get them there, or you're not seeing the growth at the pace that you want to see it, right? It's too slow. How do I know all of this about you? It's not that I read your mind. I haven't been following you around or stalking you online, but it's because I've been there. I've been in your shoes. And let me tell you just a little bit about that. So I'm a former math teacher. I taught middle school math and I taught some other subjects too, but mostly math. I was a math coach at a school for 6 years, and a couple of those years I ended up being the specialist for our 5 schools as well. Over the course of a couple of years, we increased about 30% on our summative assessment scores. It was like 28%. I would consider myself an expert in math PD and PL at this point. I did that as a job. I created and designed and facilitated math PD for about 5 years at a couple of national nonprofits before starting my own business and starting Mindful Math Coach. And in the past few years, I've become a thought leader around the topic of unfinished learning. And if you want more information on that, just stay on my email list. I send out resources and things all the time on that topic. Now, over the past year and a half, I have been working on growing Mindful Math Coach. So I quit my job in January 2020, 6 weeks before lockdown, which was interesting. And I've been spending time coaching teachers, coaching other math coaches, working with a couple of teams one-on-one, and mainly trying to share information and resources and guidance through being like an online math coach. Okay, so does this sound like you? All right, I mentioned a couple things earlier, but let's go a little bit deeper in your role as a math leader. All right, and I'm gonna get real. Do you feel like you don't have time to stay up to speed on the latest research and best practices? That was me. Like, wanted to read the books, wanted to read the articles, wanted to go to the webinars. No time, right? It fell to the bottom of the list. Do you ever wonder if you're the right person for the job because you're trying your best and you're working so hard, but sometimes you feel like you're falling up short? Yes, absolutely. I'm getting absolutely. Yes, me too. I have to tell you, my first year as a math coach was harder than my first year as a teacher. And right around Thanksgiving break, I believe I had a breakdown. I don't know what else you would call it. I literally told my principal, maybe I had to quit. I called my parents from Milwaukee and like asked them to drive down here and pick me up and bring me back to their house for a few days. And I took some time away, restored, replenished. I think I just needed, some rest, and came back and was able to continue on. But it was, I was unprepared for how hard it was going to be. And I did have a lot of doubts, especially that first year, like if I was up for the job. You wonder how other math coaches are doing it all, but you have no idea because you're the only one at your school. You don't have another math coach who you can ask to actually hear that, guess what? You're not the only one with these struggles. And by the way, nobody can do it all. Nobody is doing it all. It's just kind of like the perception, right? You get mixed messages about what to focus on with your teachers, right? So there's priorities that are set in the beginning of the year, and then, okay, 1 month in, oh, now we have a new priority coming down from the network or the district, and you walk classrooms with your principal, and now she or he wants you to focus on this other thing, and it's like, okay, well, let me just keep piling the plates up here and hopefully none of them fall. Quick tip there, because we're not going to get into that one a ton, but it's I've learned it's about managing up, and that's another skill that I didn't have when I started as a math coach. And I have a podcast episode, I can't remember what number it is, but it's called The Magic of Managing Up. It's where I interviewed my sister, who's actually a COO at like a huge company. She has like thousands of people reporting to her, and it's a really great episode. So if that's something you're struggling with, I would definitely listen to that one, because learning to manage up is going to help you. Since I've been there, like I know that sometimes it can feel like you're trying to do the impossible, or that there's like too many things that are in the way. There's a lot of things preventing you from doing your job, getting the results you want. But here's my hope for today. My hope is that you leave this training feeling inspired about the fact that you can improve students' understanding in math. It's possible. It can be done, even if your students have a lot of unfinished learning, even if you're working with a team of new teachers, even if you yourself have leadership skills you need to cultivate further. And all of those things were true for me. At our school, we were 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And our 6th graders, I want to say about 60 or 70% of them came in like multiple years behind. And I hate even saying multiple years behind, but just to paint the picture, we had a lot of ground to cover, and a lot of ground to, or like a lot to accelerate with our students. And even we had a lot of new 7th and 8th graders as well. So every year, more than half of our students came in new to the school, just because of the crazy way our school was structured. And we had, a revolving door of teachers. Had a lot of Teach for America teachers those first few years. And, by the time they got really effective in year 3, they would quit or they'd stay 1 year. And so we'd have to hire more. And even still, we were able to grow and we were able to improve. And so I want you to just feel inspired and have some ideas for things that you can do when you go back to your school on Monday. All right, so here's what I'm going to present to you today, this math improvement pathway. And watch out, because if this resonates, you might see this trademark someday. But I feel like these are the 5 steps that truly made the difference in our school. And these are the 5 steps that I kind of walk schools through when I work with them one-on-one, or even what we're doing in the Math Coach Circle. We're focusing on these 5 things because I truly believe they're the biggest needle movers here. So I'm going to share this path with you. I'd love for you to consider modeling your strategy after it, or at least taking the pieces from it that you think would be helpful. And then one of the biggest challenges is going to be staying focused and finding ways to stay focused, even if other things come down the pipeline and, other things creep up from your supervisor or, those kinds of things we already talked about. So it's getting the path in place, getting your strategy in place, and then staying on the path. Okay, but I also do want to manage some expectations here. In 1 hour, of course, there's no way we're going to cover everything and all of the details about how to improve math teaching and learning. And if you listen to the Mindful Math podcast, you will hear me say at the end of every single episode, I say a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And that's why I'm so glad we're on this math improvement journey together, and why I'm glad you've taken a single step forward with me today by listening into this episode. So today I'm going to say thank you for taking a single step forward with me today by participating in this webinar. And you'll probably want to go deeper on some of these topics. So that's why I'm going to invite you to continue working with me after this so that we can go deeper together if that would be helpful for you. You know this already, but the work takes time. We can accelerate it, but it doesn't happen overnight. It takes weeks, months, even years. And so if you want some support during that time, let's do it. Let's do it together. Okay, time to get into it, friends. Okay, so step 1. What is the first thing I would have you do to make sure you're on the path to math improvement? It's to articulate a vision for strong math instruction, for equitable math instruction at your school or your district, and then invest your team in it. Okay, so at my school, I was lucky enough to have Paula Murphy as a mentor. When I was a teacher, she was actually my math coach. And then when I became a math coach, she was the district specialist for a couple of years. Now, here's the beauty about Paula. She was a high school math teacher for 30 years. She was very well connected in the math community. She always seemed to know the newest thing. She was talking to us about low floor, high ceiling tasks and orchestrating discussions and the 5 practices way before I heard it anywhere else. And that was very helpful for me because when we met together, she would bring up these ideas and share some of the values she had and some of the strategies that she knew were very important in math instruction, like conceptual understanding and all of these things. And over time, it helped me get clearer on the kind of math teacher I wanted to be, and then eventually the kind of math teaching I wanted to see in teachers' classrooms that I was working with. And this is important because as a leader, if excuse me, as a leader, it can't just live in your head. Like, we can't just assume everybody on our team knows what we're thinking. We can't assume everybody thinks the same way we do. And so by getting clear on what you want and actually putting it out there, it's very, very helpful. So, yeah, so I learned from Paula, and she wrote like a mission statement or a vision. I don't remember what she called it, but it was essentially a vision for the district of like what math instruction, good math instruction in our schools looked like. And then she shared it with each of us coaches, and then we were able to share it with our team. And so that was just a really good starting point. So since then, when I work with schools, that's the first thing we do. And in fact, when I work with teachers one-on-one, if I'm even just coaching a teacher, I ask them for their vision. And I try to meet with their principal and ask them, and even just have a quick conversation. I remember one school I was working with, we didn't have like a full meeting for everybody to sit down together, which would have been the ideal. I actually just had a 10-minute conversation with the principal, asked her, what did she think she'd like to see in classrooms, and put some bullets down on a very like scrappy piece of paper and brought that with me. And then when I talked with the teacher and heard what she had to say, I just like showed her the other paper and said, hey, look at all the things you both have in common here. Like, we're going for the same thing. And so that's just one way to do it. But in this case with JFK, we were able to meet as a full team. So the principal, the assistant principal, and several math coaches. We did some brainstorming together in like I think it was like 30 or 45-minute meeting. Everybody put ideas down on Post-it notes, and then we categorized them and came up with this vision here, which this year now they're focused on sharing it more so with teachers and weaving it into the ongoing work and evolving it with input from their team. So tips for you on this first step: do not skip this step. This is a vital step. It is so important because it's like your anchor. It's like your North Star. And there is something about having it down on paper, somewhere people can see it. Put it on a wall, put it in a shared document, put it in your slide deck. And for every PD, you can have that be one of the first slides just as a reminder. It seems obvious, right? Like when you say it, this is one where it's like, we should have a vision, right? But what I found out, I did this workshop series in May, and maybe you were a part of it. I asked them who has a vision, and I got 2 answers from the group, 2 most common answers. One was, I've been meaning to write it down, haven't gotten around to it. And the other one was, we did that and we wrote it down, and it's like in a file somewhere. We haven't looked at it in a really long time. So that's why I put it here, even though it kind of seems obvious, right? So I would say set a timer and just get something down on paper. Just get something down on paper. All right. Let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is picking your priorities. So determining which areas to focus on over the course of the year, or maybe you want to break it up into quarters, right? So depending on kind of your situation. This is one that I brought up earlier. This is one that came up in the chat, like this idea of I have priorities, and then more get added, or someone wants me to change them, or there's too many of them. And that can definitely be a challenge. So what we did at my school was a couple of things. So over time, I would say that like one of my, I don't know, how to succeed as a math coach, like tips would be figuring out how to work within the system and still get your priorities like on the docket. So over time, I was able to like try to influence our network priorities influence our school priorities. And if I couldn't get them to be, you could never get, I couldn't ever get them to be like just solely the math ones, but oftentimes, that like starting ahead and planting seeds and having conversations with key people, like reflecting up like the needs we were having in our math team, like that actually did get some traction over time. But also then working within the system that was there. So if something came down the pipeline that was a district priority for whatever reason, finding a way to work within that and making it applicable to what we were doing in math. And so anyway, the picture here is problem solving, meant to represent like figuring out a path, figuring out how to do it. And so there's two purposes here. One is what I just said, like how do you navigate where there's lots of different ways you could go? There might be a dead end somewhere. Learning to navigate is one of those leadership skills I was talking about. That's like not about the math, but it's about you as a leader. How do you make it happen? Like, discussion should be one of the priorities, right? But your district is saying like writing across the curriculum or something like that. So how do you like merge those? How do you work within that? That's a skill that'll help. And then the second thing that we did is we really did focus on problem solving. So as I mentioned, in my school, we had a lot of students with unfinished learning, a lot of students who had kind of a negative history with math. They maybe had like teachers previously who like in a way they just felt like they didn't understand math. And they felt like, I'm never going to understand math. A couple students come to mind who I know kind of carried that with them, this feeling like, I just don't get it. I feel like I've pretty much never gotten it. And therefore, I don't have hope that I'm going to get it. Students that had a history maybe with like low grades in math class, maybe teachers who didn't value what they had to say. And so they felt like, I don't have anything to contribute, or at least that's kind of how it seems. And so we saw some behaviors that we wanted to help shift. We wanted our students to be willing to speak up. We wanted our students to be excited to share their ideas. And, sometimes there were some students who were kind of resistant to that at first. And so I remember that one time we were about to start giving some new interim assessments. We kind of piloted some for this organization. And honestly, I wish we hadn't, because what happened was the teachers told me that the kids were just so frustrated and defeated. And some kids even were crying during the assessment, and lots of like blank papers and kids not even knowing where to start or what to write down at all. And so coming off that experience, that happened in fourth quarter of one year, going into the next year, our team decided on some priorities together. So this is to the what did we do? I engaged my teachers in a conversation about where do we want to focus? What is so important? What is like, the first thing? And so together we came on this idea that we want to help our students become better problem solvers. And the very first part of that is helping them to be willing to dive in, basically. Be willing to make mistakes, be willing to read a problem multiple times, be willing to like try a few different strategies, kind of that perseverance. And then we also, once that got going, we wanted them to be able to explain what they were doing, justify, have some thoughts about, do they think they were right? Do they think they weren't right, and why, and all those things. So we ended up deciding to focus on math practice 1, which is make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And then math practice 3, which is, I believe, construct viable arguments and critique the work of others. And that that helped because we all had this shared goal. And together we were like, okay, how are we going to measure this? And we came up with a rubric, not that we shared with kids. Actually, we did end up sharing it with kids, but a rubric that we would use to kind of just gauge that first piece of, are we seeing more engagement from kids? Are we seeing more answers on papers and more explanations and more evidence that if students tried one strategy and didn't think that it would work, then they tried another strategy. And over the course of that year, we saw huge changes. We found ways to do some mindset work, and we talked about math identity, and we talked about growth mindset with our students, and we planned lessons around those things. This all happened in like the first and second quarter, getting our students more comfortable with, themselves as mathematicians and all the mindset stuff that I'm sure you're aware of with growth mindset and Joe Bowler and all those things. But we really took time to do that with each other and do that with our students. And it did pay off. Since then, I have had a chance to see other schools' priorities, and it confirms that many schools just have too many. And sometimes they have ones that, frankly, I don't believe are the biggest game changers. So here you see pictures of, lots of computers and technology. This is one of two things that I want to call out. Okay, so I think I put, when you signed up for this, that there were like two mistakes or two like priorities that can slow you down or get in the way. So I'm gonna name those here. The first one is putting too much time and too much of a stake on this idea of ed tech kind of saving us. I was excited about ed tech when it first came around too, like this idea that it could be adaptive and we could meet students where they are, and like it would save so much planning for teachers. That's probably true in like a small percentage of cases, but I've toured a lot of schools, I've walked a lot of classrooms, I've talked to a lot of leaders. Like, again, that idea of like lots of data points, a lot of times it does slow the work. And I saw this even in our own school, because the last couple of years I was there, I had a principal who was very into personalized learning and very into like blended learning and all this technology. And what happened was that so many of our professional development days went to learning the new technology, setting up systems, having the outside people come in who were from these different programs, and then this one that was like going to put all the passwords together in this other platform, and it never worked. Like, and at the end of the day, it's like we didn't even see a difference from those things, because that was after we saw this 30% growth. Those were in the final years when I had a new principal. The early years, we didn't have ed tech. It wasn't super popular then, and that's not what we did. We had a 90-minute math block, and we focused in on that tier 1 instruction, and the things that I just mentioned: getting kids to talk, getting kids to explain, helping them be willing to make mistakes, all of those, like justifying their work. We focused on just that strong tier 1 instruction, and I don't know. So I'll stop on my ed tech thing here. If you want to hear more, again, I have podcast episodes on that. I think it's episode 9 about personalized learning. You can go listen to that to hear more thoughts. But I would just be cautious. This is not to say don't bring any computers or technologies in, but just in terms of like, is that going to be the thing that's going to bring you double-digit growth in and of itself? I wouldn't bank on that. So just be cautious if people are talking about things like that as if they're a silver bullet and like this new initiative that's gonna, make the change. I think the other warning here is that sometimes we can look at other schools and be like, oh, they do this thing. If we just do that thing, maybe our scores will go up too. But I also taught science for many years, 3 years, I think. I shouldn't say many years. I taught science for a couple of years. And, what I stressed with my students was like, when you do an experiment, if you want to be able to draw a conclusion, like you only change one variable at a time. Right. And so like, I find it very hard to say, oh, this school does this thing and they have good scores, so like we should do that thing now too. I think, investigate a bit more, because maybe there's a correlation, maybe there's not, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe they're actually doing some other thing that's really making the difference. Paula, the mentor I told you about, she talked to the principals and finally, after a couple of years, got them all to agree to move from 45-minute math blocks to 90-minute math blocks. And I believe that really helped us, changing that schedule so we had more time to not only teach the grade level content, but weave in things from prior grade levels. Like that might not be something that if you visit a school, you would hear about, that like, oh, this was a change we made. And again, hard to say exactly what one thing maybe made a difference or not, but, certainly more time can't hurt, right? Okay, then the second thing is getting a new curriculum. Okay, so one silver bullet I see a lot is this idea of ed tech. The second one, getting a new curriculum. I've had experiences where actually my old school, like when I left to go to the nonprofit, they changed curriculums after like 5 years of ramping up to have everyone use the same curriculum. They just kind of threw it out and adopted a new one. And I like literally, when I heard this, went in the bathroom and cried at the PD I was at. I was like, what? All this work. So sometimes I think it's necessary. Sometimes you're using a curriculum that's so outdated. It's not aligned at all with the standards. It's not rigorous. Maybe you've had it for 10 years. It's pre-Common Core. It's pre-college and career readiness standards. And like teachers have just been doing so much heavy lifting, trying to adapt the lessons every day and like move things around. And, like there's a point in which you do need to just, I think, start fresh with a new, more aligned curriculum. But I've also experienced cases and been in meetings with teams where, the curriculum was not the problem. At least I don't believe it was. It was aligned. It was, had some pretty good problems in there. And it was more so the way teachers were implementing the curriculum that was the bigger issue. And so again, with new curriculum, it's the same thing with the ed tech that I was saying. When you adopt a new curriculum, it can set you back for a period of time because you have to get to know those new materials. There's a really, really, really steep learning curve, right? So you have to like look at, the whole scope and sequence, dive into the units, get used to the assessments, take the assessments, learn the problems, learn the lessons, like internalize them, get, all of those things. And so while you're making time to do those things, what you're not able to prioritize as much is those teacher moves that I believe really end up making the difference. Like we want to be able to get to the point where we can talk with teachers about that question you asked, that move you made, that response you gave, right? Like that activity and that discussion or whatever. And so again, I would just weigh back and forth like the pros and cons of a new curriculum. And this is one especially to be, again, in your role as that middle manager, I want to say, which I think is a tough role. Like sometimes it's not your decision what curriculum you're using. Oftentimes, I think it's probably not your decision. And that's where you want to build strong relationships and build up your influence so that when it is time and when those decisions are being made, like you are a voice at the table and you are a voice of influence, right? So if the district is saying X, Y, or Z thing, and your principal comes to you and says, hey, they were talking about what to do about these math scores, and we were thinking maybe we need a new curriculum, that you have an opinion about that, and you're able to, you know, share that and really be able to weigh in on, is that worth the year or two of learning those new materials? Maybe it is and maybe it's not. Or you could, you know, share an alternative, which is, you know, I don't really think new materials would help, because what's really the problem is this other thing. And that problem's going to follow us no matter what curriculum we use. So we really should just stop while we're ahead and focus in on that. All right, so in a nutshell here, tips for you about step 2 are to choose 2 to 3 priorities. Be careful about what you choose. Don't just follow the trend. And then these are 3 that I focus on now. These are kind of my go-to when I'm working with a school, just because I'm coming in kind of from the outside, but I'm always looking for a way to connect what they're talking about and what they're doing to these 3, which is, how do we build teachers' content knowledge? How do we make sure they're solid on what they're teaching? And also that kids, really, I should have put grade level content here, because it's about the teachers understanding the content in a deep way, but also giving kids access to it and putting that grade level in front of kids and not just going below grade level. And then the second one is shifting thinking to students, or you could call that, you know, discussion. You could call, like, there's a lot of different ways you can talk about that one. Discourse, you know, cognitive lift, but who's doing the thinking, who's doing the work in the classroom? And then third is increasing access to grade level content. So how do we, you know, have those multiple entry points? How do we support English language learners and all of those things? So I kind of just try to find ways to connect what their district priority is or what their school has named to these, and to kind of look for any blind spots. If they're missing one of these, I'll try to name that. Okay, so the third thing that I think is really important on the math improvement pathway is this idea of planning and cultivating common planning practices that are aligned to your vision. So what we did, we had 2 sort of phases. For the first couple of years, we were making our own path. We were making our own materials. We were using understanding by design. And if you're familiar, it's like these 3 stages. And first you, oh gosh, it's been a while. I think you like unpack the standards and, you know, get clear on what you want students to learn. And then you create the assessment, that's stage 2. And then you plan the learning activities. And what this gave us a chance to do was really go deep with the standards, because when you're planning your own units and your own lessons, you know, you have to read them, you have to study them, you have to find problems that align. And we had a lot of discussion on that. So I do think that that helped us get really familiar and go deep with the content. But the con there was that that's where all the time went, was in like making the things and not being able to talk about implementation, which, as I already mentioned, you know, I think is where we really can see, where we can really work with teachers on shifting their practices. And in the last couple of years, we ended up fully adopting a curriculum called Agile Mind, which we had as a resource previously, but it was people kind of just pick out of it whatever they wanted. And so we decided to all adopt it fully, which meant that we were going to, you know, use it as the base. We didn't follow it, you know, to the T every single step of the way, but it was the base. And what that was, that did 2 things for us. One, it created vertical alignment for us, right? Like students were experiencing similar things as they moved through the grade level, which is really helpful. And then 2, it gave us something to react to. It gave us a material to like start our conversations with. right? We could, instead of, starting to Google and, okay, what are we going to teach? How are we going to teach this lesson? And let's find some problems. We could look at the lesson that was already there and talk about some of these things like, how are we going to help students make sense of this problem? What kinds of strategies do you think students are going to use? What questions might we ask, at this part of the lesson? And so it just created what I like to call like a springboard for some of the actions that are really, really important. And I'll say that, like, since then, I've seen this again and again. Like, even when I go into a school and I'm coaching kind of as a consultant, as sort of an outsider, it is so helpful to be able to say, hey, which lesson are you teaching on Wednesday? And to be able to look at the curriculum and look at that lesson and then be able to start the conversation with, okay, let's talk about what's the learning goal of this lesson. What do you see as the learning goal? What do you think is the most important things for students to walk away after this lesson? And then go into, the questions and the discussions and all of those things. So I wanted for this one to talk about an unhelpful mindset that I've seen when it comes to planning. And again, this is from kind of looking across schools. So hopefully you don't have this one at your district or your school, but the unhelpful mindset I've seen a lot is all or nothing thinking. All or nothing thinking. So it's like, either we have no planning practices that are common and everybody is doing their own thing. We were all using different materials. They're not filed anywhere. So the next year, if you have a new teacher come in, like, they're starting from scratch. There's nothing in common across classrooms, or very little. And, it's just kind of like make it up as you go, kind of very loose. And then way on the other side of the pendulum here, we have some schools where it's so rigid that, we've adopted this curriculum and now we all need to do it like with fidelity, and we need to march through every lesson on this exact day. And, don't skip any problems and don't get off pace, and, all like, and I just think neither of those are going to get you where you want to go. Neither of those are very helpful, because on the one hand, you have inconsistency, and then on the other hand, you end up with a lot of resentment and just compliance kind of behavior. So some of my tips for you are to find a middle of the road approach. You have a curriculum. I would recommend a curriculum, 95% of the time. I think there are exceptions. And what are some common practices that you want to cultivate with your teachers? Like, is there a template? Is there a guide? Is there, just like 5 questions we answer before we teach every lesson? Those kinds of things. And so don't hold it so rigid, but also don't leave it so loose that everyone's kind of doing their own thing. Another tip, let your curriculum be a springboard for your math improvement efforts. So leverage the fact that you can start with that lesson plan in hand in your meetings, in your coaching time, in your PLCs, in your professional development sessions, like in your observations, right? Like, you can like ask what lesson are you on, and look it up and compare what's going on to what's on the paper. That can be very, very helpful, and I think accelerate the movement. And then create realistic structures for your unit and lesson planning. Okay, so step 4, now that you would have all this in place, your shared vision, your priorities, and these planning practices that you want everybody to be engaging in, time to coach your teachers, right? So engage in coaching cycles with your team. So what we did, what I did, for a lot of the time, to be honest, like, I feel like I was a pretty good coach. Let me tell you the good first, okay? So here's some things I did that I think were helpful. I met with my teachers frequently. We met individually, we met in grade level teams, and we met as an entire content team. And now you might say, I don't have common planning time. Well, you know what? I made the school schedule. So sometimes you got to put yourself in a position where you can have some say. And I did make sure the other departments had common planning time too. But that was a priority for myself and the other instructional leaders, and our principals too. But that became a priority and we made it happen. So we met individually, in small groups, and as a whole math team. And we did focus on unit planning a lot when we met with the grade level teams, and we focused on our bigger priorities when we met as a whole team. So that idea of problem solving and justifying and all those things. Where I think I had some missteps was in just my individual coaching. And that's because I didn't really do coaching cycles. I did more of a observe, give feedback, observe, give feedback. And sometimes it was just too much. Sometimes it was very random. Sometimes there was just like a laundry list of things that I sent to the teacher. That part was not the most effective. So since that time, what I've learned is the importance of planning with teachers, planning the daily lessons. And so now when I coach teachers and when I coach coaches who coach teachers, I always try to do a full cycle where we plan a lesson together, or they internalize and plan ahead of time, and then we do that intellectual prep together, or we kind of process together and dig into one piece of the lesson even more deeply and maybe make some tweaks or add some questions. So we prepare for a lesson or part of a lesson together first. Then I observe, collect some data, collect some evidence, and then we do the debrief. This helps shift practice because we're getting ahead of it. So looking back, it seems obvious. This is one of those duh moments that I had, where, you go in and observe sometimes and it's like, oh, shoot, I see this thing and this thing and this thing. And maybe in the feedback, it's like, you could have done this, or you should have done this, or next time do this. But if you meet with someone ahead of time, you can be so proactive with it. And then when teachers go in and try that strategy, and especially if you're there to support them because you're there for the observation, it's more likely to go well. And then they see the positive results of it, which motivates them to say, I'm going to keep trying that. The other thing is that I think it builds rapport with teachers, and it helps them see you as the coach as their ally, not as just an evaluator. I think when I would go in and observe and just give feedback, as much as I try to do, grows and glows and make the glow list longer and all of that, the feeling of it was still, okay, what am I doing wrong? And especially when teachers are tired or stressed or overwhelmed, I had some teachers that even if the glow list was 5 times longer than the grow list, they would focus on those couple of things that were, the room for improvement things. And so doing it this way just kind of flips it to, let's think together on how we can help students make sense of this math. I'll come in and you teach it, I'll come in and gather some evidence, and then let's debrief and see which of those moves that we talked through together had the desired impact that we wanted. It makes it more of a we. It makes you on the same, lets them see you're on the same team and partners you up more. And this especially is very helpful, if you work at many different schools, or, you're someone like me and you don't necessarily have a super strong relationship with every individual teacher. Right, so a couple of tips on this one. As much as possible, include planning in your coaching. The second one is to vary the kinds of observations you do. So another thing that I did was I would do walkthroughs sometimes. So just little, 5-minute stop-ins in different classrooms. I did 15 or 20-minute observations ahead of coaching meetings. And then a couple times a year, I tried to observe a full lesson. And so these just gave me a lot of different data points across the year so that I could keep a pulse on how like teachers were doing individually and also how we were kind of doing as a whole team. And then it gave me, ideas for professional learning and things to kind of weave in, because I was able to see trends across classrooms. And so it was just very helpful to kind of vary, how long I was in classrooms and try to go there frequently. And then focus your feedback. So no laundry lists. Once you've set your priorities, I would try as much as possible to keep your feedback focused on what you're trying to move forward. And that's definitely a place I could have done better. So lesson learned there. Okay. All right, step 5. Leverage collective strengths through collaboration. This one is so important. So what did we do? We did a lot of talking in our team meetings, and our content team meetings. We read articles together. We watched videos of each other teaching. We solved math problems together. We talked about, what were we seeing in our classrooms that was common, and let's brainstorm some solutions and some things to try. And I do think that sometimes I see kind of this urgent feeling, and this of like, here's a new thing and I want you to try it right now, and like, boom, tomorrow, let's do it. And I remember experiencing this when I was leading a professional learning session for some teachers. And someone at our organization, this was when I was at the nonprofit, someone from our organization came in and was like, okay, that session was good and everything, but like, what are teachers supposed to do like tomorrow with this? Like, what's going to change like from this PD? And I was like, nothing's going to really change from this PD, because this is a series of like 4 PDs. And this one was really meant to set the stage. This one was meant to kind of invest them in this idea, start to get them thinking about it, and like plant some seeds and share some experiences and just like start to have some dialogue around this. Now, I will tell you, she was not happy with that answer. But, I believe in this idea of like change over time, and that it's going to take multiple experiences and multiple conversations. It's a change management thing. If you're top down, if people are top down and it's like, just start doing this, you know how it is. When people get back to their classrooms, they'll close the door and then do whatever they want and only do it when you're there, right? So one thing that I do think that this has served me, because I still talk to teachers that I worked with, and I have data and evidence that the things we worked on, the things we talked about, stuck with them. It stuck with them. Because they're still working on these things, they're still thinking about these things, and it became part of them. It became part of who they were as teachers. And I really believe it's because they integrated it into their own vision for teaching. And that happens through experiences and conversations and aha moments and these kinds of things. It's not a directive that'll change it. So that's something I think we did really well. Now, since then, I have learned that having an agenda is helpful. There were times that I was maybe a little too loosey-goosey. Maybe we went a little too long without next step identified. So I do think there's a middle ground here. And my first year as a math coach, like, I was so overwhelmed, as I mentioned, that when we had these content team meetings, I was making it up from week to week. Like, I'm not even going to lie. Be the day of like, oh shit, what are we going to talk about in today's meeting? I just like put something together And maybe it had to do with like something I'd seen in a classroom. Maybe it was a request from a teacher. Like maybe it was something that our principal had brought up, like whatever. They were very disjointed. And, you know, just like teaching math, we're going to get better results when it's coherent and cohesive. So I had a chance to work with a man named Kyle Westbrook. He was a consultant who came in. This was maybe my second year of being a coach. And he asked me some questions around these meetings that really helped me. He asked me to just think about, you know, what did I want to see change over the course of a semester with the team, over the course of the year? And like, how could I use these meetings as a way to advance that work? What are some of the, you know, create a scope and sequence, essentially. It was flexible, of course. I changed things around as needed, but before that, I didn't even have a scope and sequence. I didn't even have a long-term plan. And so, you know, this becomes easier though, once you have a vision and once you've set your priorities, because then it's like, oh, how can we sequence some conversations and some, you know, interactions and different things to get closer to where we want to go. All right, so tips for you with this one is to balance structure with flex, to leverage group PDs and grade level. So one thing that I think is helpful is to kind of think of like, who are at these different meetings, and so what's the best use of the time. Sometimes I think it's helpful for group PDs to do kind of more of those big picture vision setting, instructional practice kinds of things. Like, let's talk about discussion. Let's talk about selecting and sequencing. Let's have a conversation about this certain mindset or something like that. And then in grade level PLCs, I think it's very helpful to dig into the content in some way, shape, or form. So you're, you know, looking at the assessments together. You're looking at data from an assessment together. You're planning for an upcoming unit, planning for an upcoming lesson. Something where everybody's kind of looking at the same grade level, and you can really dig in and like bump up that collaboration. And then thirdly, have a long-term plan aligned to your vision.